Good morning, friends, and welcome. Today's talk is on PARACELSUS as philosopher. He was also a physician, a great theosophist as a physician, so another time we'll have a talk about him as a physician. Next week's will be the first of two talks on Anton Mesmer and mesmerism. Washington, D.C. area students of Pure Theosophy meet here at 4865A Cordell Avenue, Suite 230, Bethesda, Maryland, zip 20814, every Sunday to simply observe or make comments or otherwise participate in better understanding the life to be lived. We then go out to practice as we assimilate the teachings with an aim of self-development and making ourselves better able to help and teach others. These videos are being made to reach those unable to attend meetings. If you can attend, you are invited to come and be with us to help do our part to make this philosophy available locally for those who are ready, and also as the masses of wisdom keep it alive in the world, no matter how much they and their program may be invisible to the masses. We meet here again every Sunday at 11 a.m. Every first and third Sunday of each month, we reconvene at 12:30 p.m. for roundtable readings and discussions. We are currently studying the Bhagavad Gita and related notes. We follow the declaration of the United Lodge of Theosophists. It says, "The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis, and it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all." Today's reading is from the Bhagavad Gita, starting on page 11. Thou grievest for those who may not be lamented, whilst thy sentiments are those of the expounders of the letter of the law. Those who are wise in spiritual things grieve neither for the dead nor for the living. I myself never was not, nor thou, now all the princes of the earth, nor shall we ever hereafter cease to be. As the Lord of this mortal frame experiences therein infancy, youth, and old age, so in future incarnations will it meet the same. One who is confirmed in this belief is not disturbed by anything that may come to pass. The senses, moving toward their appropriate objects, are producers of heat and cold, pleasure and pain, which come and go and are brief and changeable. These do thou endure, O son of Rata, for the wise man whom these disturb not, and to whom pain and pleasure are the same, is fitted for immortality. And now for today's talk on PARACELSUS, philosopher.
Welcome, friends. In Theosophic circles, we are recommended that from time to time we revisit those places and individual great souls who brought this philosophy into the world, but that they were degraded and their true positions through the scandal and attacks at that time was diminished. Paracelsus is one such great soul, and HPB writes about it in the Secret Doctrine. Now, why did he assume this particular title, do we think? He was an only child, and before he entered the University of Basel, today it's in Switzerland, of course, it changed hands between France, Germany, and so forth before. Now we're talking about the 15th and 16th centuries here. We are told that at 16 he dropped his family name and adopted the pseudonym of Paracelsus, which was a combination of para, meaning greater than, and celsus, the name of the great Roman physician who lived about 400 BC. In assuming this name, Paracelsus indicated that his knowledge was drawn from the occult sciences, and therefore greater than any form of knowledge springing from a lesser root. So, whatever is in the Secret Doctrine, Paracelsus also disseminated the same knowledge. He's not just a philosopher, he was an astronomer, he was a physician, the greatest that Earth has seen. And Mr. Judge has a writing where he says that he was just as great as Hermes Trismegistus. So, when we go to these 15th and 16th centuries, we find out that during that period, the world had expanded tremendously. Because as you know, the church was saying that the earth was flat and that there were nobody living on the other side because they would be upside down, is what they were saying. But as we know from geography and history, in 1486, Diaz reached the Cape of Good Hope. Then in 1492, we have Columbus rediscovering America. In 1497, Vasco da Gama opened up the sea route to India, and a year later, Cabot reached Labrador. In 1500, Brazil was discovered, and in 1522, Magellan encircled the globe. So these discoveries were quite embarrassing to the church because of the philosophy or ideology it kept and what she was telling humanity at that time. So her sons were discovering all these different places and bringing information from these different lands to Europe, to Rome particularly. But the dread discipline of the Inquisition was strictly maintained, ready for any emergency at that time. And Copernicus, when he proclaimed that the sun was a central star and that the earth was just a globe revolving around the sun, he was condemned as a heretic, and his book was placed in Index Expurgatorius. So another transition that occurred during this period was that humanity grew from infancy to manhood, just about overnight in a short period of 35 years. So inquiry began to take place of the credulity that was existing, and then reason to overpower blind belief. So the mind of Europe demanded its freedom, and the church began to lose her power. On 26th of November 1493, Theophrastus Bombast von Hohenheim, Paracelsus in other words, was born in a little village of Maria Einsiedeln near Zurich. And his father was a physician, as said. His mother was a matron of a hospital, and Theophrastus was an only child and learning all of the rudiments of medicine, surgery, and alchemy from his father. After this, we see him entering the University of Basel at 16, and then he became a pupil of the celebrated Tritheminus, and later gained some practical experience in alchemy in the laboratory of Sigismund Fugger. So when he was only 20 years old, he decided to search for supreme wisdom. This is very young by any standard. 20 years. Supreme wisdom. I'll put it here. And he started traveling in Europe. He just about went to all of the countries in Europe at that time, and ended up in Tartary, of course, part of Russia, Turkic tribes on the east, that area we were talking about. And it is said that while he was in Tartary, a great initiate instructed him in the secret doctrine of the East. And then he returned to Europe after visiting India, and it is not written anywhere, but we can assume perhaps he visited the Master's Lodge. This student does not know. But anyway, he came back to Europe when he was 32 and became the professor of medicine and surgery at the University of Basel. So at 32 years of age, he obviously found it, right? Came back to Basel. Very young. And he started a fearless condemnation of the medical practices, and so this arose from this from his comments arose this hatred and jealousy of his colleagues, and so through this persecution, Paracelsus ended up resigning his position and taking a wandering life again, very young. But he did not live very long. We know that he died at 48, so from 32 to 48, he's wandering around, and finally he settles in Salzburg at the invitation of Prince Palatine. He was murdered. It is not known by whom, but the house that he lived in is still is there opposite St. Andrew's Church on Linzer Strasse. And in the graveyard there is a mark on a white broken pyramid made of marble with a Latin inscription that Paracelsus lies there. But in these writings, we are told that Paracelsus is not buried there, that he really did not die in a regular fashion, that he's still living with the adepts in Asia, from which it is stated that he influences all those who want to disseminate his philosophy. And he did have a philosophy, and this philosophy is of course based on the general universal principles, just like the three fundamentals of the secret doctrine, and his physical experiments with magnetism in curing people as a physician comes from there. This is from Mr. Judge, where he says in 1887 in his Path, the magazine he was producing, Paracelsus was one of the greatest masters ever known upon the earth. In rank, he may be compared with Hermes, thrice master. It is considered by some students to be likely that at this period, he's talking about 1887, he who was once known as Paracelsus is in a body and meets with the astral, in his astral body, those in the east, meaning Asia. The enemies of Paracelsus censored him for his nomadic life, and he explains it this way. He says, we must seek for knowledge where we may expect to find it. He who wants to study the book of nature must wander with his feet over the leaves. Every part of the world represents a page in this book, and all the pages together form the book that contains her great revelations. He was also condemned for refusing to affiliate himself with any religious sect and for his frank criticism of the Roman Church. Paracelsus denounced public prayers, church-going, bowing and observances of church rules, running after saints, as all of these things were opposed to the self-reliance which was the keynote of his philosophy. And we know what HPB told us in the 19th century by repeating the same thing, that the students of this philosophy has to become self-dependent, that depending on others is not a way to go. Buddha says the same thing in the Dhammapada, where it says that self-dependence is bliss, other dependence is misery. So here is Paracelsus telling us this how many centuries prior to the 19th. So he did not take part in the Reformation, but he openly showed his approval of Luther. Now, Dr. Husser took 106 books of Paracelsus and collected them. And from these gathered books, we can see that Paracelsus had a knowledge of the laws which govern the evolution of the physical, astral, psychical, and intellectual constituents of nature and of man. He declared that true wisdom is not confined to books, nor to any particular period in history, because it is the eternal wisdom, and it is without time, beginning, and without end. So in his day, all wisdom comes, he said, from the East, where he had gone. In making this statement, he spoke with an authority born of personal experience. It was not boasting. He was himself a member of that fraternity of adepts known as the Brothers of the Snowy Range. He described these teachers, saying that some of them lived like normal men in their physical bodies, while others became transformed and disappeared in such a manner that nobody knew what became of them, and yet they remained on earth. And of course we know who these personages are. HPB explains it in The Voice of the Silence, and they are Nirmanakayas. They stay around the earth field and help humanity progress forward. The adept living in his physical body is given a definite name by PARACELSUS. Quotation, such a person, he says, being a master of heaven and earth, by means of his free will, is called a magus. Therefore, he says, magic is not sorcery, but supreme wisdom. He went searching for supreme wisdom, and he says that it is not sorcery, but supreme wisdom. So he obviously obtained it. And furthermore, he says, this can be obtained in one way only. It comes, he says, to those who are abandoning self, sacrifice themselves in the spirit of wisdom. Those who seek truth for their own benefit and gratification will never find it. But the truth finds those in whom the delirium of self disappears, and it becomes manifest in them. Even though the philosophy and his doctrines of PARACELSUS sprang from the same source as Theosophy, there is a difficulty in understanding his philosophy because of the terms he used. HPB uses Sanskrit terminology of the East, but PARACELSUS actually coined words to express what he was trying to say. But remember, we have Inquisition at this time, so it is not clear as to what the meaning of the words are unless you have a key to figure out what they mean. And we're given the key here in these articles. He used the words magnus limbus. And there's another one, Heliaster. In which he says the matrix of the cosmos is contained, and the universe exists in a condition of potentiality, which is the same thing as we are told in the secret doctrine. He compared this matrix to a nursery in which the seed of the universe was germinated, describing the condition of the universe at that time as similar to the heat contained in a pebble. With manifestation, he says, Heliaster divided itself, developing within itself the mysterious magnum. HPB calls it primordial matter. It's the same thing, just different words that he coined in order to express his ideas at that time. This primordial matter expressed itself as vital activity, of course is mysterium magnum for him, an invisible spiritual force, and two, as vital matter, the basis of all forms. As Heliaster dissolved, the third power of the supreme cause arose, linking the spirit and matter into an indissoluble whole. What are we told that this is in the secret doctrine? We're talking about Fohat, but he named it Ares. It's equal to Fohat. PARACELSUS saw the spirit and matter present in every form and would not admit the existence of dead matter. There is nothing dead in nature, he affirmed. Everything is organic and living, and therefore the world appears to be a living organism. There is nothing corporeal, he says, which does not possess a soul hidden in it. There exists nothing in which is not a hidden principle of life. This principle of life, he said, moves slowly in the mineral kingdom. Plants and animals, it moves faster. But there is life in every form, from the lowest to the highest. Paracelsus stressed the underlying unity of nature as a whole, as well as the interrelationship and interdependence of all its parts. Nature, being the universe, is one, and its origin can only be the one eternal unity. It is an organism in which all things harmonize and sympathize with each other. It is the macrocosm. Man is the microcosm. And the macro and the micro are one. And this is quoted from his Philosophia Atheniensis. This unity of man and nature makes man the focal point through which the three worlds of nature, physical, astral, and spiritual, manifest themselves. So we have a key position that we occupy in the evolutionary process. The three worlds are made up of a vast quantity of beings or lives. Some of these lives are intelligence, others are not, and it is man's duty, he says, to understand their natures. The ignorant man may be controlled by the lower lives, but the true philosopher has learned how to control them by the power of the supreme in themselves. So, here it is, the same philosophy. Paracelsus divides men into two parts, and then into three, and finally into 7 distinct principles. Man, he says, is a twofold being. He has both a divine and an animal nature. Divine and animal nature. He has, in other words, he's twofold. And after clearing this, he says there's a triple division, declaring that both man and the universe are composed of 3 substances, which are the 3 forms or modes of action in which the universal primordial will manifests itself. And he symbolizes this as salt, sulfur, and mercury. Mercury. The first substance represents the physical body, in other words, soul. The second refers to the indwelling, energizing, and we call it the astral. The third is the intelligence, the indwelling, God or spirit, however you want to name it, which is above the other 2. So that's the trimurti we talked about. He's expressing it in this way. He says, these 3 substances are held together in harmonious proportions, and when this is the case, health is the result. Their disharmony constitutes disease, and their disruption spells death. Physical science deals with the physical, metaphysical science with the astral, but he says these sciences are misleading and incomplete if we lose sight of the existence of the divine and eternal in man. And this is in his De Fundamento Sapientiae. After establishing the fundamental idea of the threefold nature of man, Paracelsus then divides him into 7 distinct principles. He says there are 7 elementary powers or principles, 4 lower ones belonging to the mortal and changeable things, and a trinity of celestial power, which is also called quintessentia. The 4 lower principles can in no way interfere with the quintessentia. He then analyzed these 7 principles, beginning with the lowest, or the elementary body. This body, he declared, is derived from the elements and will return to them after the death of the body. It has no powers of its own and is commonly supposed. The power of sight does not come from the eye. The power to hear does not arise in the ear, nor the power to feel resides in the nerves. On the contrary, it is the spirit of man who sees through the eye, hears through the ear, and feels by means of the nerves. He boldly challenged the materialistic concept that mind is the product of the brain by declaring that wisdom and reason and thought are not contained in the brain, but they belong to the invisible spirit, which feels through the heart and thinks by means of the brain. All these powers become manifest through the material organs. The material organs determine the mode of their manifestation. De viribus memborum. The second principle, called prana or jiva in modern theosophy, is described by PARACELSUS as the archeus. Or liquor vitae. And we can compare his writings with what is in the Ocean of Theosophy and see that they are very similar. This comes from his De Generatio Homini and Ocean of Theosophy. We'll read Ocean first. It is a universally pervasive principle. We're talking about the astral body or the model body. It is the ocean in which the earth floats. It permeates the globe and every being and object in it. PARACELSUS. The whole of the microcosm is potentially contained in the liquor vitae, in which is contained the nature, quality, and essence of beings. This life principle is universal, not the property of any individual. During the life of an individual, it acts in him as a unity. When the form is broken up at death, it begins to manifest itself in other forms. And this is a direct quotation. The life which is active in a man during his lifetime is causing the organic functions of the body, will manifest its activity in creating worms in his body after the spirit has left the form. So the worms actually don't enter the body from the soil if it is buried. It seems like the body creates its own worms. Ocean of Theosophy. The astral body is the guiding model of the physical one. PARACELSUS' De Generatio Homini. The invisible man is formed in the shape of the outer one, as long as it remains in the outer. The astral body is made of matter of very fine texture as compared with the physical body, says Ocean. The sidereal body is ethereal in its nature, but still it is substance, says PARACELSUS. The astral body has within it the real organs of sense. In it are the sight, hearing, power to smell, and sense of touch, we're told in the Ocean. The physical body has the capacity to produce visible organs, but they all take their origin from the invisible body. The fourth principle in man's constitution, which Theosophy names Kamarupa, I'll put this up here because this is quite important. And not to mix it with anything else, it is not a rupa when we are in life because it is very much functional. It has corresponding name here, which PARACELSUS calls mumia. The vehicle through which, he says, the will acts for effectuating good and evil. The mumia of a living being, he says, is of the nature of the other beings from whom its vital force is derived. When we eat the flesh of an animal, we not only take its flesh into our system, but also attract its mumia, which combines with our own passional nature. Interesting, isn't it? So, Theosophy does not recommend what we should eat. And HPV says it's not just vegetarianism that is promulgated here. We don't recommend anything. And she says cows are vegetarians too. In other words, we assimilate what is similar to our nature is what she's talking about here. And here is Paracelsus telling this to us in the 16th century. He says, for this reason, we do not eat the flesh of ferocious animals because that would increase our own ferocity. So this is a subject that requires thinking by everyone for themselves. He says the mumia of any creature is closely connected with the blood. Well, we know that when we digest food, the nutrients get circulated in our bloodstream and goes to all our organs. He's not saying anything that we don't today know, but perhaps back then they didn't. So, now we come to the basis as to why we should also be aware of blood transfusion, vaccination, and various inoculations that we go through to prevent disease. Because these, when they come into the body, have their own power to affect us. There is an article on health that HP wrote sometime later that the germinal cells, which are in the vaccines, do okay as long as our immune system can control it. But she says when the immune system is down and it can no longer control it, they germinate in us. So we need to be very aware as to what we are doing with our kids in this field here. Paracelsus points out, the mumia coming from the body of a person or animal continues to remain in sympathetic relationship with the mumia contained in such person as they act magnetically upon each other. This is called the transplantation of diseases, and many practices of sorcery are based upon that fact. This is Paracelsus telling this to us. He also declares that the mumia of a person may be strengthened by the power of the imagination. And he says this is a tremendous force able to create actual images in the astral light and to give it a kind of consciousness to these forms. Imagination, he says, is a great power. And if the world knew what strange things can be produced by the power of the imagination, the public authorities would cause idle people to go to work. He made a careful classification of the different types of astral monsters created by evil imaginations and offered a pertinent suggestion to the authorities. And this is his suggestion. It is very desirable that some good and wise men, well versed in the secret arts, should be appointed by the authorities to counteract and prevent the evils produced by the wicked who practice witchcraft and sorcery. And they should pay particular attention to convents, monasteries, and houses of prostitution, because in such places a lascivious and evil imagination is especially cultivated. His words. After analyzing the fourth principle, in man's constitution and showing the necessity of purifying, PARACELSUS turned to the fifth, manas, and then sixth, to buddhi. He describes the fifth principle as the rational soul, the connecting link between body and the spirit, and he says this reasoning part of man's nature should not be confused with the sixth principle, which is our spiritual soul, and does not need to reason because it knows. Buddhi is the perceptive power of knowing directly. And he tells us that it is characterized by the faculty of intuition, and the development of which must be accompanied, he says, by self-reliance. In order to be a true philosopher, a man must above all be in possession of that faculty which is called intuition, and which cannot be acquired by blindly following the footsteps of another. He must be able to see his own way. What others may teach you may assist you in your search for knowledge, but you should be able to think for yourself and not cling to the coattail of any authority, no matter how big sounding the title of the latter may be. This is coming from his De Modo Pharmacandi. The higher trinity in man, in philosophy of today, in Theosophy called Atma Buddhi Manas, is described by PARACELSUS as the man of the new Olympus. He says this is God within, the immortal being which nothing can destroy. After death, he says, the physical body disintegrates, but this immortal enters the state of Devakan, where the soul enjoys felicity. PARACELSUS says its higher essence goes to form the substances of the body of the paradisiacal man, the man of the new Olympus, while the lower essences dissolves and the astral elements goes to its own field operation. The soul in this condition, he says, does not enter into communication with mortals because she has no desire for anything earthly. She does not think or speculate about terrestrial things or worry herself about relatives or friends. It is in a blissful condition. He says this state is a state of pure felicity, bliss, and enjoyment. The whole purpose of life, according to PARACELSUS, is to realize one's inherent godhood. There is no God, saint, or power in which we can place any confidence for the purpose of salvation, except the power of divine wisdom, he says, within ourselves. Only when man realizes the presence of God within himself will he begin his infinite life and step from the realm of evanescent illusions into that of permanent truth. This realization can be attained in one way only, and this is, he says, by the abandonment of the personal self. Only when the illusion of that little self has disappeared from my heart and mind, and my consciousness arisen to that state in which there will be no I, then will not I be the doer of works, he says, but the spirit of wisdom will perform its wonders through my instrumentality. In other words, the white light then shines through the physical, because the physical has become a temple fit for that light to shine through. Now we will open it for questions. Or comments, for that matter. Yeah?
It seems like what you're outlining is almost the exact opposite of what is still being taught today.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I was watching the preaching on this morning.
Huh.
They were saying, don't worry about hanging on by your fingernails. In other words, don't worry about trying to do it yourself. Just believe, and everything will be cool.
Well, this philosophy are for those, what did he say, who are awake to the inner life, the last paragraph says, what did we just read? The last paragraph says, the whole purpose of life, according to PARACELSUS, is to realize one's inherent godhood. So, if the soul has not awakened to the inner life of the soul, then we are not awake. This philosophy helps awaken certain individuals who are ready to be awakened, but if you are not inclined in this way, nothing that can be said from the outside is going to awaken you to the inner soul life. So, until this inner soul life is awakened, you won't perceive it. And what did Mr. Judge tell us? Conversion to this philosophy is not possible. Conversion is not possible. We should put it up here. Conversion. Not possible. Because it is not suggested that you believe anything that is presented even. Because what is presented is to give you hints in the right direction. Paracelsus himself says that you cannot rely on another person, regardless however high their title is, that you have to do this work for yourself, and you can't rely on another human being to give it to you, because it is internal. And what did HPV say? Don't follow me, she says, in all of her articles, but follow the way I show, the way of the masters. And that also causes a whole lot of problems, because if you're not familiar with the masters or their philosophy, then what? So a lot of us searched for this philosophy in this life. Remember, perhaps we were in it before, but we don't remember it. Correct? So those unawakened souls are still our brothers and sisters, because they also constitute that humanity that we are part of. So HPV says, in her time, 2/3 of the people were asleep. And do you think we have immensely improved on the numbers in this century? I don't think so. Perhaps we're awakened to the first virtue, which is Dana, love and charity, a bit more today because it is verbalized. But when you look at society in general, that attachment to materialism, it is very much in place. But not only that, you can see the division that is also occurring in different nations. One lot is moving towards oneness, the universal principles. The other lot is moving in the opposite direction. What did they tell us in the 19th century when this philosophy was brought out? That the skepticism had gotten such a hold of the human mind that it was very difficult to get human beings out of it. And HPV says this philosophy was not brought out into the world. The ones that were ready to receive it had no place to go to receive it from. And for that reason, she said, it was brought out. Their purpose is that a nucleus of universal brotherhood be initiated, that these centers be in all nations, that in time, when the numbers start increasing, it will have a tremendous power to pull all those minds who are in accord with it. So if this is the low point, then we have to still work for it. But there is an article in the Theosophical writings where it says that United States, in other words, its future is not known, because depending on what the population is going to do, she says, it might stay as a unity, or it will fracture into 4 or 5 pieces. Into 4 or 5 pieces. So they do see the future, but what we are doing helps it or stunts it. So if we are not going to be a nation promulgating unity, universal harmony, benefit for all human beings, not just United States, because what did Thomas Paine say at that time? He saw this vista opening through the channel of the United States to all of humanity all over the globe. So where are we? You know, each human being must think about these issues. Where are we today? In which direction are we going? And then make their own choices as to what issues they're going to stand up with and what they're not going to stand up with. Because she says, when you go along with the generality, then you're guilty of omission, because you're not taking a part in whatever it is that you're against, because on its own it will not sort itself out. But it is also, sorry, my throat is dry, it is also known nature itself is doing amalgamation in the United States. It's putting everything together from all different parts of the world. But what it does afterwards, it separates. One side is going to be right side, and the other one is going to be the left side. That also is part of nature's intention, because in all eras that this philosophy has existed up to now, that has occurred. That the Atlanteans, which is us, we sank because we weren't doing the right stuff at that time, and we're told that now that the thought process is free in the West, we're all coming back. And she says, look at your societal norm and see if the same things are not being done in our lives today. What were the Atlanteans doing? They were using their powers to destroy, not to build. We really need to think about it, because we are going to be split, we're going to be fractured. We might not remain as a United States, because at the beginning we were not. We might just go right back to, it's going to be obviously fracturing into larger pieces than the original ones that started that unification process. So I hope that helps you a little bit, because nature itself will do the job, but without us doing the real work in it, it will not go in the right direction. That is also very obvious. Yes?
Okay. This is so different than what we're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. It seems like, and Mr. Judge talks about, and it's also, I have noticed that people are changing quietly in a positive direction. The unity is going on. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Judge, in his ocean, gives us how slowly we change in a table there, and we hardly observe it. From a scientific standpoint, it's almost unobservable. But I think maybe there is hope that we are moving in that direction, although we have bumps in the road like we're experiencing today.
Okay.
In our politics.
Well, we gave a talk on the scientific discoveries, and the viewpoint of the masters on that is that of itself is nothing. It just depends what use we put it to, what is being discovered. Are we doing good with it, or are we, after money getting, killing large numbers of people elsewhere? If we are humanity as one family, then my brother is being killed in another continent, but still it's my brother. I have some responsibility. As a nation, we have some responsibility as to what's going on elsewhere, because it's our money, it's our tax money that's doing it. We are not guiltless, regardless of whether we participate in the actual thing or not. We are not considered guiltless. So, we have to be mindful. I think mindful. Mindful. We have to be mindful as to what's going on around us. Materialism is very much our state of affairs today, and some national policies are changed in that direction. We're not concerned about our universe, meaning Earth, how clean it is, what the air is doing globally. If we don't have an Earth to live with, where are we going? Are we going to Mars? Not so. Not so. According to this philosophy, all of the globes of the solar system are fourth round globes. Fourth round.
May you repeat what you just said? Sorry?
The globes that we see in the sky, the solar system, Mars, Mercury, Saturn, Venus, all those globes are all fourth round globes. What is our condition? We're the fifth subrays of the fifth root in the fourth round. All of the humanity around the globe fits into this category, but we are not all at the same place. Some nations are very advanced in science and materialistic advancement, in other words. Other nations are very poor, but they have spirituality.
When you talk about nations, you're talking...
Yeah, different parts of the globe.
World.
In the East, for instance, some people over there are very poor, but they're spiritual. Spiritual versus material. And our scientists obviously are moving to discover things. But what is missing from that? We just said we're not just a physical body. We have an astral body. Have we learned the next stage of development? Because this is the next one. The astral, then jiva, then mumya, our kamamanas, all those do exist, whether we know it, whether we acknowledge it or not. This is the constitution of the universe as well as us, because we are an exact miniature copy of our own universe. So the implication here is that those who are going to benefit humanity are invited to learn how to work on a higher plane. And Mr. Judd says, without power, when that time comes, we will not achieve this. Where is the power coming from? What did PARACELSUS tell us? That each human being is a powerhouse, but it's internal. You have to awaken it to the soul life and suppress the personality. And that requires lifetimes of effort that we won't be able to achieve it in one lifetime, but if we continuously make that effort, it will come at its own time. But you can't force it because you have to grow to it. How are we trained? Well, you're going to be trained on the astral world, are you not? In other words, that ethereal world is right here. Okay, those who have the eyes can see it, but functioning in it is not the same thing as seeing it, because the psychics see it, but they get the wrong information from it, because in that world you have to be able to read through all of the colors of the spectrum. And if your eye only perceives the green, where's the rest of it? In other words, that limited knowledge or visibility factor does not give you the truth alone. We are told that you have to synthesize it, all of them. So what is our visible spectrum? Red to violet. All of them has to be in it in order for you to get the truth from that world. So anyway, this is where we are. we are going to etherealize because we are the most solid now. We were not solid before. We have reached the most solidity that we can have. We are told that the physical body is perfected. The reason why it has all these ills in it is because we have misused the elementals that formulate our sheaths. As soon as we learn how to treat them correctly, she says, all those will go away. But each human being must make this effort for himself or herself because no one else from the outside can do the work for us. I'll talk to you personally if you have other questions. Unless...
Yeah.